Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Manu Kashyap from Advaita Academy. I welcome you all to yet another session of Conversations on Consciousness. Let us start with a small prayer. Sarvatma sarvadrugyosau sarvadhyasa nirasakrit satatam sannidhattam me hridaye paramashivah. Today, we have a very special guest, Sri Lakshmi Narayan ji. For the benefit of our viewers, I would be introducing him to the audience. Lakshmi Narayan ji is a senior disciple of internationally renowned philosopher Swami Parthasarathi ji. After learning electronics and communication engineering, he had a brief stint in all India-based engineering company. He gave up his professional career to join the full-time residential course on Vedanta and its practical applications in life conducted by Swami Parthasarathi ji at Vedanta Academy near Pune, Malavali, India. He graduated after learning and living Vedanta at the Academy for 3 years. He regularly organizes public lectures and seminars for Swami Parthasarathi ji. He has dedicated his life to the study and research and propagation of Vedanta. He has been conducting Vedanta study classes for over 2 decades in India and abroad. He routinely delivers in-house programs for corporations, educational institutions, and other organizations on various management topics. He has also organized and have benefited from his programs. Many organizations have benefited from his program. Some of the organizations are Indian Army at Mathura, Uttar Pradesh, Technical Parts Company, Abu Dhabi, KPMG India at Gurgaon, and so on and so forth. We welcome you to the session, Lakshman ji. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you.
Without much ado, I'll directly move on to the questions. Could you please tell us how your interest in Vedanta developed at a young age and how did it form? And also share us your journey. How did it all start?
Yeah. Hari Om Manu. See, actually, I would say that I was initially inspired by Swami Vivekananda. You know, some of his talks on practical Vedanta, especially on Karma Yoga. And even I had read his life history, and even that was very inspiring for me. So I would say my source of inspiration in the beginning was Swami Vivekananda. And of course, having grown up in Tamil Nadu, you know, in schools, we were exposed to Tirukkural. You know, so there's a lot of, you can say Vedanta. In fact, Tamilians call it as fifth Vedas, you know. So you can call it whatever you want, but there's a lot of philosophy that we gain in Tamil scriptures as well, you know. So Tamil literature is also very deep. A lot of literatures you grow up studying in schools itself. And also, since I was growing up in 70s and 80s in Tamil Nadu, it was time before television and all that. So I grew up in an area where there were a lot of, you know, these kind of discussions, classical music and all that used to be there. So there has been a lot of question. Generally, I would say that I'm a questioning type, you know. It's very difficult for me to accept things blindly. So even things that I would probably do it as a habit, within me, I was questioning, you know, because when you grow up in a particular family, there are certain rituals and cultural things, what they believe in, they will follow. Not necessarily that they're doing it with awareness, you know. They might be doing it mechanically, but they're elderly people. It's not that we should not question them. It's not that I know more than them or anything like that. But generally, this question used to be there. So when you ask, sometimes you don't get answers only. In fact, they shut your mouth saying, why are you questioning all this? You simply follow, you know. So it was difficult for me. So basically, since this questioning nature was there, I continued questioning things. And then, you know, I came across my guru, Swamiji, through somebody. Then his books, I found certain answers. Then I decided I should study. That's how I got into Vedanta.
And you mentioned the point that how Tirukkural was taught at school levels. And I have heard from my grandfather that he used to study Kalidasa and his works. and other classical texts that were being taught at school. I think we have lost the tradition of teaching classical texts in our school education.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know what exactly could be, given as a reason for that. There may be many, some maybe even political, and I'm not saying who's right, wrong, but yes, we should get in. See, for example, Ramayana, right? In Tamil, we have this Kamba Ramayana, right?
Yes.
So in Kamba Ramayana, when Lord Rama defeats Ravana, and he loses all his weapons, So he says, Indrupoi Naleva, which means you go back today and come back tomorrow, So you learn certain values there also. When your enemy loses everything, you don't laugh at him. You give him another chance to reconcile, to change from within. End of the day, everything is to bring about a change in heart, right? It's not to finish off anybody. It is just to change the gunas, to move from tamas to rajas to sattva and beyond. So he says, Indrupoi Naleva. And then in Kamba Ramayana, Kamban says that how the mindset of Ravana was at the time, he compares it to a person who's taken loan, So he says, Kadan Pattar Ninjam Pol Kalanginan Ilangai Vendan. So Ramayana, the story is going on, and Kamban is trying to teach us something else along with it. He says, about loans. And later on, when I came to study under my guru, since my guru had also, studied abroad, and he also teaches us a lot of Shakespeare's works and William Wordsworth's works, Robert Browning's works, etc. So Shakespeare also says, neither a borrower nor a lender be, So that concept of borrowing. So he says, Kadan Pattar Ninjam Pol Kalanginan Ilangai Vendan. How the mind of a person who had lost in the battle, he is comparing it with a person who's taken loan, So you learn something else also along with it. So any scripture, whether it is Kalidasa's or Kamban's or anybody for that matter, whether Western or Eastern, doesn't matter. We definitely learn a lot. So I personally believe these things should be incorporated, but as it is, nowadays students are burdened with a lot of things to study. So if it's not so much of a burden, if it can be incorporated, definitely, why not?
Yeah. And could you tell us more about the meeting with your Guru Swami Parthasarathi ji, and how did you come to know about him? And what kind of teachings or learnings did you take, and what kind of influences he had on you?
See, after at the time I was actually working. So I was in engineering company, I was in marketing. So that's the time as a youngster, I used to read a lot of English books on self-help, Oi Mandino and all those kind of books to make it big in life, like any youngster, just want to make it big in life, and ambitions and career, this, that, those kind of thoughts were there. So through one of my cousin sister's husband, me and my other friend, very close friends, we came to know of this book written by Swamiji called the Vedanta Treatise, The Eternities. That is his main work. He's written quite a few books, but his main work is Vedanta Treatise, The Eternities. He took almost 20 years to write the book. And he always says, there is nothing in the book is mine. All that he's done is he's captured everything which is there in all the texts, almost 30, 40 books, you can say, in the West and East, everything put together, Sanskrit and all that. And he's put it in modern words and thoughts, appealing to modern minds with presenting it with a lot of wits and logic, So that's the book I was introduced to by my relative. And then he said that this book is being discussed in a discussion class. And Swamiji's own daughter and disciple, Srimati Sunanda ji, she is conducting it in one particular school in Chennai. So why don't you all go there? He was telling me and my other close friend. So we went there, and we were there in the discussion class. We were very nervous in the first class because, probably we were the youngest when we went there. We were like, probably we were 21 or so. Okay. So we were just quietly sitting and observing what's going on there. And after the class, we went and bought the book. Straight away we asked, is is the book available? And they said, yes, it is there. And in my whole life till date, that's the only book I read sitting down the whole night. I've never read any book like that. So, like I said, I had a lot of questions, and it is written in very simple English. And Swamiji follows the method of moving from the known to the unknown. So he's beautifully presented the book in 3 parts. First part, he calls it as Introduction to Vedanta. And the second part, he calls it as Practical Vedanta. And the third part is what he calls as Essence of Vedanta, where he gets into the deeper concepts of, Vedanta Upanishads, like illusions, theory of perception, and all that comes there. So in the beginning, he talks about exigency of action. It really explains everything which an youngster would want to know, and also it changes the, if at all there was any wrong ideas about spirituality, it kind of changes that also, So that's the book I read. And then I started participating in that weekly classes regularly, once a week. And within 2-3 months, Swamiji had come to Chennai.
And this was while you were working?
Yes, I was working that time. Yes. It was in 1992. So Swamiji had come to Chennai. Every year he gives this Gita Jnana Yajna. So he had come to Chennai in Nardagana Sabha. He was lecturing on chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, I think, in the evening. And in the mornings, he used to lecture on Mundaka Upanishad. So those days, I think it was a 7-day lecture, if I'm not wrong. Don't remember exactly the number of days, but it was a different feeling altogether I went through those 7 days, So that's the time I took a call and said, this is something that I need to know, because always I thought that spirituality would probably tell you to do good and be good. But then I realized it is something beyond good, bad, and ugly, So it is something that is very deep. There's a lot to know, and I think I didn't make a wrong decision. Yeah. So that's when I decided that I should pursue this, and then everything followed suit. Yeah.
And could you share some anecdotes with the Swamiji's interactions? What are the core lessons that you carry till today?
So see, like I said, the very first chapter of the Vedanta Treatise book, there's a sentence which still rings in my head. It says, the role of Vedanta is to pull man out of his infatuation to personalities and educate him on eternities. That was something like 30 years later, I'm still remembering. Not because I'm, teaching that book. Even that time, something which really woke me up. It said, you got to pull yourself out of attachment to personalities, So I think in the latest edition or so, he's changed it to celebrities. The word personalities has been edited to celebrities, which means more or less the same. So the role of Vedanta is to pull man out of his infatuation to personalities and educate him on eternities. And through Swamiji, we were introduced to Swami Ramatirtha, great Swami. And he also says, message is delivered, kill the messenger. Not literally. Message is delivered when a postman comes and delivers. Well, you will be grateful to him, but you're not going to hug him and stay put with him, right? You're going to read the message and move on, right? Yes. So the same thing, like he says, don't get stuck with personalities. Got to move on. And when you come to Upanishads, the same thing. The Upanishads, they didn't bother to copyright, You don't even know who the guru is in some of the Upanishads and all that. So that is something which I can say that really had an impact in me. And then in most of his lectures, he says, it is not the length of study that matters. It is the depth of study.
Correct.
So many times what happens, see, like in Sanskrit or in Tamil or many different languages, there are too many things to study. How much one can study? I mean, like if you go to Tirumandiram in Tamil, it has more than 3,000 verses. I mean, in Tirukural itself is 1,330. Bhagavad Gita is 700. I mean, whole life won't be enough to study everything, right? So it's not the length of study that matters, but the depth of study. And that is something which still rings bell. And then another thing is given in the Vedanta Treatise book is, it is not renunciation of action. It is renunciation in action. Yes. So that is something which I really can say that these are things which I can say that I recollect from Swamiji's quotations or book or whatever. And even when I studied under him and I've continuously been moving with him, thing that I see in him is how you can bring this wisdom of great masters into day-to-day living. That's his main thing, you know. So when you move with him, you can always see. And he's one person who always focuses on that knowledge, because he says that's the only thing that can make you absolutely independent.
Correct.
You know, so unless and until you reach that, nothing else is going to save you. So he always emphasizes on that. So these kind of things, I would say that if you talk about Swamiji, I can recollect. Yeah.
And you said that you decided to study full-time 3-year residential course at Vedanta Institute. And when did you decide that? And how did your 3-year study go about? And also, you said that you were working at the time. How did you face this transition from a professional to a student, a 3-year residential student? How did you prepare yourself for this?
See, honestly, I would say maybe I didn't prepare, because had I prepared, I would have not joined. So I don't know. I mean, hindsight, I can say, well, I made the right decision, all that. But that time, like, you know, see, I had lost my father when I was very young. I was only 4 years old and my sister was 6 months old. So it was a tough decision to leave my mother and sister alone and go and study for 3 years full time, you know. So that one was there. And so, you know, but something was telling, you know, this is something that you need to study. And I decided, if at all I'm going to study, it's going to be under Swamiji, you know. So I'm young, so I need to go. That was there. So the only, if at all, the challenge probably was to say no to my mother if she says, stay back, you know. Luckily, she didn't. But she definitely had concerns, you know, like going to an ashram, leaving everything, your career and everything. Somebody who had lost her husband, and all her hopes would have been on the son, you know. Yeah. So and now here the son is grown up, and when he's working, suddenly he quits everything and goes. And obviously she would have a lot of concerns, right? So that was a little tough thing for me. So I told her, listen, if you say don't go, I won't know what to say to you. So what I would say is, in case you have any issues with this, why don't you come with me? I'll take permission from Swamiji. You come with me. We both will go and stay. After staying a few weeks, if you say, still I shouldn't stay, then I'll come back with you. Then she said, no, nothing like that. You go, I'll come after 6 months. Then she came after 6 months, and then once they met Swamiji, they were also very convinced. In fact, after me, my sister also came and studied with the ashram. Oh. So it was not a tough thing. So as far as moving from professionalism and all that, I understood that engineering is not my swadharma. You know, it just happened that I went into engineering. Now, sometimes when people say, oh, you're an engineer, I say, no, please don't quote me. Don't ask me any questions on engineering. I don't know anything. Not that I know many things in Vedanta, but still, definitely in engineering, I can say I don't know much. So it was not my swadharma anyway. So I realized that. So that's why from service engineer, I moved to marketing, you know.
Okay.
Because I always love to talk. So I moved into marketing, and then I luckily heard Swamiji and I read his book. So I took the call and plunged. So it was not much of a preparation or anything. Maybe if I had thought too much, I would have probably gotten a little shaky. But I didn't think too much. I just joined. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a wonderful journey that you have taken up. And it is said that to study Vedanta, one needs to have sadhana chatushtayam, that one should be prepared. There are some prerequisites in order to study Vedanta. And you have been teaching Vedanta to organizations, corporates, and so on. How can the lessons of Vedanta be taught to organizations when we know or we don't know if the sadhana chatushtayam is there?
See, in Vedanta, we talk about 4 goals, right? Purusharthas, Dharmartha, Kama, Moksha. Now, sadhana chatushtayam is more for people who want moksha, right? And for that matter, you want to do anything. Like if you want to play hockey, you need a hockey stick. You want to play cricket, you need a cricket bat, you know. So for everything, there is a qualification. So when we talk about Vedanta, there is practical Vedanta, like Karma Yoga. There is deeper philosophy, Jnana Yoga, right? Like even Vedas, They call it as Veda Purva Bhag and Veda Ant Bhag. You know, so when we go to the organizations, we are not getting into the deeper philosophies, nor are they interested, right? Maybe one or two from that group maybe would be interested in the deeper philosophy. They are more interested in practical side of Vedanta, you know. So which is there in all the texts, whichever we have quoted so far, whether it is Tirukkural or Bhagavad Gita or Upanishads. Upanishads more of subtle philosophy. Here and there you will find some, you know, practical Vedanta things. But once you come to Bhagavad Gita and many other scriptures, there's a lot of practical Vedanta which is definitely useful for organizations, you know. So those kind of things is what we dwell upon when we go to organizations, and that's exactly what they want to know, basically. So therefore, instead of getting into sadhana chatushtayam, go and ask, you know, do you have viveka, vairagya? I mean, they just have basic, they are too much of action-oriented people, you know, and to contribute to the economy of this country or to the world, you need them, right? Like we have in our ashramas also, there is brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. So grihastha should take care of brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyas.
Yes.
Right. So whatever research the sannyasis have done and vanaprasthas have done should also be helpful to the grihasthas.
Correct.
If it is not, then people will say, in Tamil they say, you know, Etu Surakai Kari Kodavadu. You know, people think it is all for post-retired people, you know, not for youngsters. That was one of the concerns when some of my friends' parents or somebody were raising when we were going to the ashram. They said, what happened? Why you want to go now? Why don't you go after 60? Can you not study this here itself? Why do you have to join 3 years course, leave everything and go? You know, those kind of concerns they have because they think that this is a philosophy that is divorced from daily living. It is something that is only for post-retirement or old people or sannyasis, you know. So those kind of concepts still there, you know. So that's the reason when some organizations approach us that, you know, we would like to invite you to come and give us lecture on these topics. So then we do definitely take it from Vedanta, from the practical aspects. So there, you don't have to bother too much about sadhana chatushtayam and all. So we are not definitely going to talk Kena Upanishad or Mundaka. Neither are they interested in it, right? Yes. So when your goal is moksha, like even in Tattvabodha, the you know, very clearly in the invocation itself it says, Mumukshu, for Mumukshu, Tattvabodha is written. Even Atma Bodha, you know, it is for the Mumukshu. Tapo Bhikshina Papanam, Shantanam Vitaraginam, Mumukshu Nam. So he goes with all these qualifications. For them, this Atma Bodha is written. Right? So we are not going and giving the knowledge of the self. We may touch upon it here and there.
Okay.
So the whole philosophy is from the practical angle when we go to the corporates. In fact, we don't go. Some of the corporates, when they, you know, invite us, then we do that.
Okay.
The minimum one has to do so that they understand that it is not post-retirement. It is something that needs to be practiced in the din and roar of market field. Yes. You know, like Mahatma Gandhiji says, any fool can find Shanti in Shanti. You know, you need to be a wise person to find Shanti in Ashanti. So in the din and roar of market field, if this philosophy is not useful, then what is the use in studying it? You know, so there's a lot of material in this philosophy which is useful for our practical living. So those things we give it to them in different topics.
And you mentioned that Bhagavad Gita has been popularized as a Vedanta management text, and you also take it up for teaching corporates. How do you go about teaching Bhagavad Gita to these corporates, and what is your teaching methodology, and what are the insights that you give from Bhagavad Gita?
See, Bhagavad Gita, you can say it's a manual of life and living. It's a manual for life and living. And if Bhagavad Gita doesn't teach management, I don't know which text teaches. You know, the first chapter itself, which is called as Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Now, Arjuna wants to lay down his bow and arrow and he becomes incapacitated to act. Is completely overpowered, is overpowered by his emotions, right? And who is Arjuna? He is number one in the art of archery. He is extremely skillful, well experienced. He's fought many battles. He's called as Dhananjaya.
Yes.
He's brought a lot of wealth to his country, right? So he's called as Dhananjaya. And he's a very skillful person. He's like Roger Federer in tennis or Sachin Tendulkar in cricket. So in his field, he's number one. He's very skillful. He's attained the skill. He's got experience. He's got everything. Still, he fell down. Still he succumbed to his emotions. And to a person who succumbed to his emotions, this philosophy was given by Sri Krishna, and it resurrected him. So that is management. How to handle oneself. So the intelligence that we have, or the skill we have, or the experience we have, many people in India also, they say, my experience is twice your age.
Yes.
So what? It's not that we are being very disrespectful or something, but generally they say, my experience is twice your age or thrice your age. So Arjuna had tremendous experience in warfare. Still he succumbed to his emotions. Like they say in English, the strength of the chain is its weakest link. So he had many strengths, but one weak link is enough. No. So that was his weak link. So he succumbed. So in Hindi they say, no, दूसरों को जय से पहले खुद को जय करे.
Correct.
So Bhagavad Gita teaches that. So that is something that is very, very essential in management. To what extent you are a CEO of your life, to that extent only you can be a CEO of anything in life. So there is emotional intelligence in Bhagavad Gita. There is relationship management. Bhagavad Gita talks about gunas. Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga is there. Three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Fantastic explanation on these gunas. So when you relate with people, you have highly sattvic person, highly rajasic person, highly tamasic person, all kinds of people are there. How to relate with them. You learn relationship management from there. You learn stress management. In fact, Arjuna was completely stressed and he was completely resurrected by the philosophy. So stress management is there. Leadership, in the third chapter, verse 21, Yadyad acharati shrestha tattat eva itara janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. So whatever the leader does, that the followers do, not what he says.
Yes.
So that is applicable to parenting also. So there is parenting, there is relationship management, there is leadership, there is emotional intelligence, there is how to be successful. Ananyas chintayanto mam yejana paryupasate tesham nityabhyuktanam yogakshemam vahamiyaham. To bring yourself to that ananya chinta, that single focus. All kinds of things, everything is there in Bhagavad Gita. And for success, one of the most important ingredient is objectivity. Learning to be a sakshi. So you can neither have a mitru bhav or shatru bhav. You should have sakshi bhav, right?
Yes.
So that is something that Bhagavad Gita gives you. So what doesn't Bhagavad Gita give? It is just that we need to study and bring it into modern words and examples to give it to the people at large. But there is enough material in Bhagavad Gita concerning management, and not to talk about that particular verse, that there are many verses, but that verse like Udared Atmanatmanam, Natmanam Avasadayet, Atmaiva Atmano Bandhuhu, Atmaiva Ripur Atmana. Your mind alone is your friend, your mind alone is your enemy. So end of the day, it is managing your mind. Right? Now when I'm talking to you, I have to manage my mind. You have to manage your mind. We need to be conscious of the time also. Right? So it's end of the day managing mind. So that's why in a light-hearted way, I tell my people, if some of you ask you, what did you learn in the Gita class today? Tell them mind your own business. not in an arrogant way or something, because Bhagavad Gita teaches you to mind your own business. Otherwise, generally, what are we concerned about? Why Salman Khan is not getting married? Is he going to get married at all? Whom is he dating now? I mean, that's his life. Let him deal with it.
Yes.
So we are all the time worried about others' life. So Bhagavad Gita teaches about minding your own business, minding your own mind. So if you can mind your mind, then you can mind anything in life. So that is something that basically Bhagavad Gita teaches, as you know. So therefore, that's why, and also Arjuna, to whom the Bhagavad Gita was given. Now you ask me, you're going and teaching to organizations, do they have Sadhan Chatushtaya Sampanna? I don't know if you ask Sri Krishna when you meet him. So, Arjuna was a man of action. On the battlefield, he's asking, there also, luckily Sri Krishna doesn't give him just like that. Only after he surrenders,
Yes.
in the 7th verse of chapter 2, when he says, Karpanya dosha upahata swabhavaha, Pirchami tvam dharma sammuda chetaha, yashreyasya nishitam bruhi tanme, sishyasteham shadimam tvam prapannam. Only when he becomes Sishya, he teaches, because knowledge is never given, it is taken. So, some kind of qualification is there. And mainly he's a man of action.
Yes.
So, to him also, Bhagavad Gita was given by Sri Krishna. So, for us, we take that as the inspiration and we say yes to the corporations. But as I said to you, we deal with practical living, and Bhagavad Gita is the best manual for management. Not that the other scriptures don't have. In fact, in our, especially in my classes, wherever I go, I also quote a lot of Tirukkural,
Okay.
Tirumandiram. Wherever, why not? If it's there in Quran or Bible, why not? Everybody is giving the knowledge, why not use it?
I think this is what makes the lessons of Bhagavad Gita universal in nature. We
Yeah.
can apply it to wherever it is needed at different levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you mentioned about how Dharmartha Kama Moksha is the goal. And out of this, which is the ultimate goal of life, and how should one go about to achieve it?
See, when you talk about goal of life or purpose of life, if I have to put it simply, purpose of life is to live. Now, if you simplify it further, for 1 hour, we said we both agreed that we'll have this interview, right? The purpose is to talk on this philosophy, consciousness. I think this, you're calling it as conversation on consciousness.
Yes.
So, so talk on those things, right? So I suppose we'll be moving slowly into all those kind of discussions also. So the whole thing is, that's the purpose. So if you say purpose of life is to live, right? And what does living means, right? Living. So in Sanskrit, it's defined as Anubhava Dhara, stream of experiences. From the time you are born till the time you die, from womb to tomb, it is just experiences after experiences, series of experiences. And 1 unit of life is one experience. And what is an experience constituted of? The experiencer and the experienced. When the experiencer, you, contact the experience, there is experience. So, in this, experienced is the world, right? Which the scientists, politicians, economists, they're trying to develop. And this is something that constantly changes. But you, the experiencer, is the one who's permanent in all the experience, right? So you are contacting it. So you need to study about yourself. And when you go deeply and know yourself, that's when your mind will be totally in the present. Like Patanjali says, Chitta Vritti Niruddham Yogam. Our mind is going in all directions. So the whole thoughts needs to be controlled and directed, is what he says, right? Integration. So now, generally our mind is going helter-skelter like horse, right? So when I can bring my mind to single-pointedness, then it can be resolved in the subject within. We can say that we've reached the ultimate purpose of life. So once I know who I am, then everything becomes clear. So one of the examples we generally discuss in Vedanta, you might know that, like if you are lost in a desert and you don't have a mobile phone or anything with you, how would you get back to your city? What would be your something that you can hold on and get back. How will you get back to your city? If I ask you that question, what would be your answer for that? You are lost in the desert. You have no mobile, nothing. Using what will you get back?
Maybe the path that I traversed, if I remember.
No, the sun above.
Okay.
When I know which direction the sun is rising, I know that is east.
Yes.
Once I know that is east, then I know the west, south, north, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. So when I know myself, then I get clear direction in life. That's why in Kena Upanishad, part 2, mantra 5, the Guru says, Iha cheda veti data satyamasti. Nachediha veti mahati vinashti. If you have not lived the life of Satyam, which is finding your true self, you have wasted your life. That's what the Guru say. So therefore, from that angle, ultimate purpose is to realize the self. But to realize the self, you need first Chitta Shuddhi, Chitta Ekagrata, self-purification, self-development. Now, when I set an alarm to get up in the morning, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, I get up 5 minutes before that, switch off the alarm and go back to sleep. That's my condition today. Now, what I'm talking about, self-realization and all that. So, when you bring that goal down to our level, we can say that the goal is self-development. At least what I say, my mind should listen, should not go by likes and dislikes per se. So I should strengthen my intellect, so my buddhi should control my mind. So let me strengthen my intellect. That should be my first goal. The your question is ultimate goal. Ultimate goal is finding yourself, because that's what will make you live your life totally. So therefore you got to find yourself. But if you have to put it in a layman's term, I would say, what is the purpose of life? What is the goal of life? Simply live your life. Don't complicate it too much.
And you mentioned about realizing yourself, own self, and living. It is the goal of life. And is Vedanta the only path to achieve this? Or what about the universal experience that we have, the Sarvatrika Anubhava that we experience? How does Vedanta see all this?
See, we say Vedanta, we take it as Upanishads, right? The Antbhaga Vedas, which is Upanishads, which gives the knowledge of the self, right? And this Upanishads, the knowledge of the self, is given after the Karma Kanda, the Veda Purva Bhaga. So you can also look at Vedanta as something that you go beyond Vedas, something that you go beyond action, right? So in the Vedantic circles, the famous example of finding the 10th man, the 10 people trying to cross the river, and they established one person as their leader when they were crossing the river. And after crossing the river, the leader counted. He only counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the 10th fellow is missing. 2, 3 times he counted. He didn't count himself. So he thought the 10th fellow is missing, and everybody was sitting and crying. Another person who was passing by, he said, why are you guys crying? So they said, 10 people crossed, only 9 of us are there. He counted, 10 of them were there. So he understood what the problem was. So he made that guy stand there and he counted. And he said, you are the 10th fellow whom you thought is lost. Right? So the 10th fellow is not lost for you to gain. So action cannot be the means to gain that. Right? It's knowing. It is subjective. Are you with me? So in that sense, if at all somebody is saying Vedanta is the only path, it's probably okay. Otherwise, so what I'm trying to say is, ultimately, it's knowing the subject within. Right? Many paths can lead you to that end. So ultimately, even including studying Bhagavad Gita under a guru or Vedantic philosophy, you can get stuck and just be intellectually curious. Okay, I can be waiting for my guru to complete Tattva Bodha so that I can go to the next text. How long is this going to go? I hope he'll finish this and go to the next. The point is not, like I said, the length of, like Swamiji says, it's not the length of study, it's the depth. So ultimately, everything has to get you to know yourself. So if you say that finally, by that Vedanta, if you mean knowledge, like Adi Shankara says, Pakasya Vanni Vajnanam Vina moksho na siddhyate. Just like how fire is the direct means for cooking, cutting, washing, marinating, you can do all that. But final means is fire. How to put it in fire. Similarly, finally, it's the jnana. And that is Vedanta. In that sense, I would say, if you want to use that word only and emphasize that only, well, one can. But every path will prepare one, whatever is suiting that person. But finally, one needs to know it within. And when you talk about Sarvatrika Anubhava, universal experience, I've heard from many masters on this topic here and there. Like, you can have your own experience within. I can have my own experience within. I can't deny your experience. You can't deny my experience. But when my experience and your experiences matches, when I see the same self percolated everywhere, and you see the same self percolated everywhere, and as a result of it, naturally the compassion and everything oozes out, then we can say, well, both of us agree upon that. Otherwise, I'm not going to deny your experience, nor can you deny my experience. So ultimately, if you say, is Vedanta the only path? No, because Vedanta, if you say Upanishad, is the same thing used by Advaitins also, Dvaitins also, Vishishtadvaitins also, everybody. Yes. Right? We don't have an exclusive copyright on it. Right? So in engineering, we have what is called this isometric view. You have to do that engineering drawing. So you have the front view, top view, side view, like that. When you draw the front view of the house, it will be different from the top view. It will be different from the side view.
Yes.
Right. So house as a whole, when you realize your purnatvam within, that is knowing. It is not through action. So in that sense, some people may say action will not lead you there. Finally, it's only knowledge. It's only Vedanta. It's only Vedanta means that knowing. We don't want to poo-poo the bhakti marg. We don't want to slight the karma marg or anything for that matter. I don't think so. Any master worth the name will do it.
Yeah. And in your previous answer, you mentioned how we should not give up action itself, but you should, you mentioned something like that.
Come again?
You mentioned that we should not give up the action itself. And there is a huge misconception that Adi Shankara advocated only Gnana Marga and denounced the karmas. Please, could you please share some light on that?
See, you yourself use the word misconception, right? So I would agree upon that. See, Adi Shankara was a great Karma Yogi, great Bhakti Yogi, and great Jnana Yogi. There was one person who can be called as great Karma Yogi, Bhakti Yogi, and Jnana Yogi. It is Adi Shankara. There may be a few more, but Adi Shankara is one. He established 4 mutts. He walked the length and breadth of this country and established 4 mutts. And so many things he has done when you look at it from the karma angle. And bhakti angle also, if you see, he's written Saundarya Lahari, Lalita Sahasranama, many things are there. And from Jnana, whatnot, he's done everything. Bhashyas, everything is. So Adi Shankara, he didn't denounce karma. For that matter, I don't think so. Any master will denounce karma or anything for that matter. They don't want anything to become mechanical. Karma, like in the Shastras it is said, can maximum take you to heaven. Right? And it will bring you back. And as a human being, you have a potential to do karma yoga and attain chitta shuddhi. Why you should do karma and get stuck and go to heaven and come back? Go, come, this kind of going and coming business, So that is what Adi Shankara is trying to say in his own way, right? So Adi Shankara, I don't think so he denounced karma at all. In fact, if he denounced karma, he would have not written commentary on Karma Yoga. So, he wants you to do karma also as a yoga, like any master, So, therefore, he doesn't denounce karma because karma helps us to purify. Chitta Shuddhi. And Upasana helps us to attain that Chitta Ekagrata. Without Chitta Shuddhi and Chitta Ekagrata, how can I get into Gyan?
Correct.
So all he wants to say is action cannot help you to find the 10th man. Because 10th fellow is not lost. If somebody is lost, only you can find him. You are not Ajnani. You are not Manu Kashyap. That is your name. You are not Lakshmi Narayan. That's your name. You are not a man. That's your sex. You are not an engineer. That's what you do. You are not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. That's your caste. You know, you are not Satvik, Rajasic, Tamasik. That is your guna. You can go on and on like this. So, end of the day, you are that Atma. Why are you? You can't find it, right? You cannot. You have not lost it to find it. So, action cannot help you. So, therefore, he says, Pakasya Vanni Vajnanam Vina Mokshona Siddhyate. So, like that, for Jnanam is the only means, in that sense, for moksha. But to come to that state, obviously you need to be a grahastha. See, few people like Swami Vivekananda, Adi Shankara, Swami Chinmayananda, few more people like them probably could directly go to sannyas. Right? Yes. Many of us need to go through grahastha and then slowly come to sannyas. Whether you come to sannyas lifestyle or not, to come to that sannyas spirit, which is an evolution, which is a state of mind. So, how can you deny karma? Or Adi Shankara never denounced karma. He only wants to say that let it be a stepping stone. Let it not be a stumbling block. Because if you see in this country, majority of us are stuck in rituals. Now, even this discussion, I mean, you are recording it now and you will be putting it up online later on. And if you see views will be less, more, doesn't matter. We are not doing it for views. But supposing, if supposing we are going to discuss about some mantra which will give us success, this, that, you see the views, it will be like lakhs, I don't know what it is, right? So, end of the day, people are stuck in rituals. Rituals and work and karma, action, only that success, in that spiral they are lost, isn't it? So, he just wants to say, as a human being, you have to keep on moving. Like Swami Ramtirtha says, you know, when you are a small child, it is okay to play with toys. Now, when I meet Manu Kashyap when he was 5 years old, he was playing with teddy bear. Now, the same Manu Kashyap has come to interview me, and he's also come with a teddy bear. Right? I said, come on, yaar, Manu, when you were young, it's okay. You played with teddy bear, not now, right? Yes. You expect somebody to grow. Life means to grow, right? So, when we need to grow, don't get stuck with karma. Use the karma as a stepping stone. Let it not become your stumbling block. So, therefore, he says, it will help. It has a role to play. It will purify you. And then it will make you qualify to sannyas, renunciation. Sannyas means internal renunciation. See, even for having this conversation with you, I need to be focused. I should keep my mobile phone, everything switched off so that there is no distraction. No. So when I have to come to Gyan, if I have all kinds of distraction, how can I focus? And this is something very subtle. It is there, yet we don't see it. That's the kind of problem that we are having. Everybody asks, where is God? It's very easy to ask them. Now, to say that God is everywhere, but why am I not able to see them? You know, so then we get into trouble. So it requires a lot of subtlety in us. So to prepare us to that level, we need to grow out of desires. So what helps us to grow out of desires is karma yoga. So therefore, he doesn't denounce karma. He only says, use karma yoga as a stepping stone to rise to that level, then move on.
So how does one move from karma, practicing karma as a ritualistic perspective to karma yoga?
See, when we merely do action to fulfill our desires, we keep increasing our vasanas because we are going to be thinking about the object of desires. But in karma yoga, we say karma yoga is dedicated action. We do it with arpana buddhi. You do it for a goal, right? Not for your personal end. So you fix your intellect should be fixed on the goal, like he says in the 30th verse of chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Mayi, you have to surrender everything in me, isn't it? So, in me, mayi, he says. So you got to pitch a goal with your intellect, and your mind should surrender to that goal, and your body should act in that direction. And when you do that, you're not going to be thinking about the object of your desire. So how do we develop vasanas? By unintelligent, constant thinking. Isn't it?
Yes.
Unintelligent, unconscious thinking, we get into vasanas.
Vasanas.
How do I get out of it? By intelligent, conscious, directed actions. I can give you an example. As I'm talking to you, I can play with my mala, and then I can make knots unconsciously. Right? Now, if I want to remove these knots, whatever knot I make of this mala, can I remove this with being unconscious?
No.
I have to focus. I have to pay attention. So, when I do a dedicated action without thinking about the result, right? I'm not thinking about the object of my desire. And I'm also putting my energy focused in that direction. Thus, my action also will be fulfilled. I will get the result. At the same time, I'm not going to develop vasanas. So, on one side, I'm going to fulfill my desire. On the other side, I'm also going to rise above my vasanas. Right? So, basically, for example, you may have desire to have children, desire to marry, which is nothing wrong. It's normal, right? So, if you give a direction to that, you make it an ashrama. And then you're not all the time thinking about it. You just go through all the experiences, but you've divinized everything. You know, like when we make modak for Ganeshji on his Chaturthi, Vinayak Chaturthi, we make modak, right? So the devotees of God buy the best ingredients the previous day itself. They wake up in the morning, take bath, purify their body and mind, sit down, and then start making the modak. While they are, incidentally, they may also like the modak, not only Ganeshji.
Yes.
And they know very well that finally it will come to them as prasad, right? So they may like it, whatever likes and dislikes they may have. Still, the thought is oblating it to Ganeshji. So they are all the time thinking about Ganesha, even when they're making it, and they're pouring ghee and everything, and the aroma is coming, everything they're going through. But in and through, the focus is on Ganeshji, Ganeshji, Ganeshji. So then finally they offer the modak to Ganeshji and then take it as prasad. So the same way when we do the action, it becomes karma yoga, isn't it? Arpana buddhi and prasada buddhi. So Swamiji, my Guruji used to give this example. When we turn our fingers downwards to pick the flowers, when we do puja, you know, when it's like, you can compare that to mind turning towards the world downward. You pick up flower which has vasanas, fragrance,
Yes.
you know. So when you turn it upward and leave it at the feet of the Lord, when you turn it upward, the flowers fall away. Flower has the fragrance which represents vasanas. So when your focus is downward towards fulfillment of desires per se, you pick up vasanas. When the same thing is done with a direction above, you drop the vasanas. So thus slowly, slowly you're going through that also, but at the same time you're rising above that also. You know, so when we do that, even though we've gone through everything, nothing sticks to our mind.
Correct.
Instead of saying it's bad, negative, desire is bad. Who said desire is bad? Nor are we saying that desire is good. Anything we resist is going to persist.
Correct.
So why resist? Rather direct it intelligently. So this is what I understood from the Gita that Sri Krishna or Adi Shankara Ji is trying to tell us. So they are never against karma. So when we do like this, then the vasanas drop. You know? So then our mind drops all the preoccupations. That is another thing which my Guruji says, you know, Vedanta is not against occupation. It's against preoccupations.
Correct.
Like when some of the students come to study in the academy, when Swamiji interviews them, especially foreign students, abroad, when students enroll in college, even here, nowadays I hear that some of them go for this study loan.
Yes.
Abroad also they go for loans. And then they might have heard Swamiji or read his book or something, and they want to give up the course and come in between and join the ashram. So Swamiji, I've seen one or two students, Swamiji, when he interviews, he asks, do you guys have any loan? No, you want to come and study here. Do you guys have any loan? And if some of them say yes, then Swami says, yeah, you come and sit here, then your mind will be thinking about that loan. You won't be able to focus here.
Yes.
So he says, see how you can, pay off the loan. And maybe if he can help also, he will help directly, indirectly, whatever way. But he tells you to drop all the preoccupations. So before we come into full-time pursuit of this Vedanta and all that, whether you take to sannyas lifestyle or not, at least the bulk of the preoccupations should be dropped. So for that, definitely you've got to be in action, but do it as karma yoga. This is what Sri Krishna also says, no? Even to maintain your body, you need to do action.
Correct.
Isn't it? That's what he says in the 3rd chapter. So action helps the moment it is given a higher direction.
I think that was a wonderful example that you gave us, the Vasana flower. And I remember the verse, Yat karoshi yadashnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat tapasasi kaunteya tat kurusham adarpanam. Just wonderful how Krishna puts it. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. And many say that everything that we see and we perceive is just illusion. But how can one deny our experience of touch, sense, hearing, etc.? Is this illusionary? If this is illusionary, which is real?
See, first of all, Vedanta teaches you not to deny anything. What Vedanta teaches is to question everything, not accept anything for granted. Just because I'm seeing something, it doesn't have to be taken as real. Nor do I have to say that it is unreal. So you phrase the question by saying, how can we deny the world? Because some people call it illusion. I don't think so. Any masters called it illusion in the sense of unreal. They use the word mithya. Right? Now, the point is, Vedanta doesn't say deny. I mean, it will be foolish. Manu Kashyap is sitting right in front of me now through this camera. I'm seeing him. I'm denying Manu Kashyap. Then I need to be admitted in mental asylum. I mean, he's there. So that doesn't mean it has to be real either. So anything and everything, don't accept blindly, question. For example, some of the stars that we see today, right? With our naked eye, we are seeing the stars. But now it has traveled so many light years. So it has reached so many light years. I mean, it has taken so many light years to reach us. When you are actually registering it, it may not be there.
Correct. Very true.
Right? Similarly, we see that light is coming from the moon. This is my naked eye experience. But upon probing, science tells me that there's no light coming from the moon. It's the borrowed light from sun. So what Vedanta says is, anything that you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, feel, think, whatever it is, don't accept it blindly. Question. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. The Upanishad called as Prashna Upanishad. Right? They need to question. Let's question. So when we question, then what seems real? This conversation that I am, Lakshmi Narayan, having with Manu Kashyap is there in this state, what we call as Jagrat Avastha, waking state. Right? When I go to sleep as a dreamer in Swapna Avastha, this is not there. And when I go to deep sleep, both are not there. Here in Jagrat Avastha, Manu Kashyap is interviewing Lakshmi Narayan. In Swapna, Lakshmi Narayan maybe is asking Manu Kashyap questions. because Manu tortured Lakshmi Narayan with so many questions in waking state. So he's so frustrated in the waking state. He's been thinking about it, and it comes to him in the dream state. And in dream state, he is taking revenge. I'm just giving it as an example.
Yes.
Completely different experience. So the experience of the waking state is only real now. It doesn't hold true in the dream state. Both the experiences of the waking and the dream doesn't hold true in deep sleep, right? So therefore, in Vedanta, the masters have said, we cannot call it unreal because now I'm going through that. Nor can I call it real because it doesn't exist at all periods of time. Reality is that which is defined as something that existed in the past, exists now, and will continue to exist in the future as the same. So then how can I call it real? I cannot call it unreal, nor can I call it real. Then can I call it partly real, partly unreal? How can partly real and partly unreal exist together? Half snake, half rope. Cannot be. Therefore, then what? I cannot call it real. I cannot call it unreal. I cannot call it partly real, partly unreal. Then what? Mithya. Mithya means what? It doesn't have an independent existence. Like ornaments do not have an independent existence apart from gold. So gold is Satyam, ornaments are Mithya. Similarly, Brahman is Satya, this world is Mithya. So in the world, when you are a waker, the waking world is real to the waker. You can't say that this waker is real, all the waking experience is unreal. Then I need to go to Naselum. Isn't it? Waker and the waking world come together.
Correct.
When did the world begin for me? When I woke up this morning.
Yes.
My mind and the world come together. How can I deny the world and keep my mind? Then it's foolish. So this is a relative reality. So that's why they call it as Vyavaharika Satyam. This is not Paramarthika Satyam. This is Vyavaharika Satyam. In Vyavahara, it is there. You deal with it. So in the dream, if a lion chases you, you better run. If you say a lion is an illusion and you sit down, the lion will come and eat you, and the excruciating pain that you will go through, you should also be able to say that is also illusion.
Illusion.
That time you don't say, oh, it's painful and all that. Right? So if you ask them, why should I run if it's illusion? That running also is illusion. Who said that running is not illusion? Within illusion, there are certain cause and effect rules, regulation. You follow that. This is what whatever little Vedanta understood is teaching us. So Vedanta doesn't deny. Vedanta says, in fact, Swami Ramtirtha and many masters, they said, don't believe anybody blind. With all humility, I will say, even Adi Shankaraji and, anybody for that matter. In fact, Adi Shankaraji will not appreciate if we follow him blindly. Isn't it?
Yes.
So, therefore, it doesn't say accept or deny. Question, scrutinize. You come to a conclusion with your own thinking, reflect. Take guidance from masters and everything. Everybody. Go, and then finally you reveal the truth from within yourself. So, as this concept of illusion goes, this is what Vedanta says. Now, there's one question that Swamiji beautifully has put in this Vedanta Treatise book, which I was referring to. He says, then Vedanta studying also is illusion, isn't it? For that, there is answer in Vedanta itself. It says it's like Swapna Simhavat. Like when a lion comes in the dream, of course it's part of the dream, but it wakes you up.
Yes.
So this study of Vedanta will catapult you to a different level. So we also accept that Vedanta is also part of this illusion, if you want to use that word. But by illusion, we don't mean denial. We mean
Correct.
Relative reality.
Yeah. And there is a huge misconception that illusion is, it's not at all there. It is unreal.
Exactly.
But as you said, it is dependent reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And Vedanta says that consciousness is the ultimate reality. It is the Paramarthika Satya, which is throughout all the states of reality. What exactly the term consciousness mean?
See, the term consciousness cannot be defined. Just like how light cannot be per se defined without the reflecting object, isn't it? If I ask you what is light, or forget that, if I ask you what do you see, like now this book is there. This is a book written by my guru also. Now this book is there. If I ask you, what do you see? You will say book. But actually what you see is book plus light.
Correct.
So then what is light? Book plus light is equal to what I see. Right. Then what is light? Whatever I see minus the book. Isn't it? Whatever I see minus the book is light. That's why when we travel in space, they say it's dark. It's not that there's no light, but there is no object for the light to reflect. Therefore, it's darkness. Isn't it?
Yes.
So when there is an object, the light gets reflected. So whenever we see any object, it is nothing but object plus light. So now when I say I perceive, what is that perception? Let's say seeing. I'm seeing an object, right? Object plus consciousness. I'm conscious of that object. I'm conscious of Manu Kashyap. I'm conscious of this computer in front of me, right? I'm conscious of, we say, right? So just if I ask you, are you conscious? You will ask, of what? Right? Of what? So we can only understand consciousness that is conditioned by either an object or a feeling or a thought. We don't understand consciousness per se. Isn't it?
Yes.
So if you ask what exactly that consciousness means, that's why always they say that consciousness is the reality, the substratum. In fact, with the help of that consciousness, you're asking this question. With the help of that consciousness, I am also struggling to answer that question, right? And whatever I know, whatever I don't know, it is illumined by that consciousness.
Correct.
I say, I know your name, which is Manu Kashyap. I don't know your father's name. I know your name. I don't know your father's name. I know my knowledge. I know my ignorance. Both my knowledge and my ignorance is enlivened by that one I know, which is pure consciousness. So that consciousness which illumines the knowledge and ignorance, that is the pure consciousness. This much only we can talk about it. We can't, strictly speaking, define it.
Correct.
It is Shrotrasya Shrotram, says Kena Upanishad.
Yes.
You understand? You cannot define it. The moment we try to define, we are fooling ourselves.
That is just wonderful answer that you have given us. And you're also conducting many workshops and retreats to students of Vedanta. What are some of the workshops that you are conducting at present?
At present, in pandemic, everything is online. And it's not like we have lined up few programs which I can straight away quote. But on and off, when some corporates contact us, we have programs on, managing stress, controlling and managing stress, emotional intelligence, personality re-engineering, and relationship management, leadership, time management, increasing productivity, value system, valuable values. Many programs as such we have. And then we also have, weekly Bhagavad Gita Vedanta classes going online. If people are interested, they can go to our website, vedanta.delhi.org.
Okay.
I'm teaching in Delhi. So our website is called as vedanta.delhi.org. Swamiji's foundation is called Vedanta Cultural Foundation. Their website is called as vedantaworld.org. So people may be from different parts of the world. We have disciples of Swamiji teaching across the world. So you have all the classes, details given in that website, vedantaworld.org. Pertaining to Delhi, you can come to vedanta.delhi.org and you can get all the details. So we have weekly classes on Bhagavad Gita, Upanishad and all that, and other books by my guru, and also Atma Bodha and all that. Then apart from that, we also have certain special programs on and off for children. In fact, in June, in the Vedanta Academy in Pune, at the academy, they are having a program for children It's called Next Gen.
Okay.
Next Gen, you know. So that's happening in June. So you can find all the details in our website, vedantaworld.watch.
Okay. And we are almost towards the, we are also coming towards the conclusion of the session. And before that, I would like to ask, are there any closing remarks that you want to give, suggestions to our seekers who are entering Vedanta now? How should they prepare themselves for the study?
See, I will tell what my guru says, right? Just be in the present, do your sadhana, right? Result will come. He once told in the, they call, in the class, that act, comma, not to achieve. Love, comma, not to be loved. Study, comma, not to learn. Let the goal remain with the goal. You shall get there. Very beautifully he put it. You know, the comma is very important here. Because you don't say act not, comma. You should say act, comma, not to achieve. Act, comma, not to achieve. Love, comma, not to be loved. Study, comma, not to learn. Vedanta is more of unlearning, right? So, study, comma, not to learn. Let the goal remain with the goal. You shall get there.
Wonderful.
So, simply on a daily basis, whatever we need to do, Hatha Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, whatever may be your Dinacharya, you follow that. Karmani eva adhikaraha mahaphaleshu kadachana. You know, so we will get there. We have to get there if we are in the right direction. Like Sri Krishna says, Nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. You know, so this is what my guru has said. So when you asked as a closing remark, it can be a closing remark from my guru through me. If at all there was any mistakes, only that is mine. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answers that you have given us. Viewers, with this, we conclude yet another session of Conversations on Consciousness with Lakshminarayan ji. From the entire team of Advaita Academy, I thank you immensely for agreeing to do this interview, Lakshminarayan ji. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.